There are moments in life when you realize the story you were told about yourself was a lie. Not all at once, slowly, like rot spreading through good wood. I didn't know it yet, but the night my father threw my duffel bag onto the front lawn was the first investment I ever made. It just took 30 years to mature. I grew up in a narrow 2-story house on the south side of Street Lewis, the kind of place where the floorboards creak even when no one's walking. My father, Richard Hale, ran a small manufacturing company out of a converted warehouse near the river. Sheet metal parts, industrial fittings, nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and then some. People in town respected him. Feared him a little, too. Inside the house, though, respect was a one-way street. My younger brother, Kyle, was 6 years behind me. Blonde hair, easy smile, the kind of kid teachers loved even when he didn't do his homework. From the day he could walk, my father treated him like the future. Kyle sat at the head of the table next to Dad. Kyle went with him to the shop on Saturdays. Kyle got praise for breathing. Me? I was difficult. That was the word Dad liked to use. Difficult because I asked questions. Difficult because I didn't smile when he insulted me. Difficult because I didn't clap like a trained seal when Kyle tied his shoes without falling over. When my mother died, cancer, quick and ugly, whatever thin layer of fairness existed in that house disappeared. I was 15. Kyle was 9. Dad didn't know how to grieve, so he ruled harder. Louder. Meaner. The night it happened, Dad called me into the living room. Kyle was already there, sitting on the couch with his arms crossed, pretending not to watch. "You're old enough to understand how this works," Dad said. "Kyle needs more space. He's growing. Needs his own room to focus." I already had the smallest bedroom in the house. "I can move my desk," I said. "Or we can—" "No," Dad snapped. "You're done here." I remember blinking, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You're going to your aunt's," he said. "Pack what you need." My aunt lived in Indiana. 3 hours away. Might as well have been another planet. Kyle didn't say a word. Just stared at the carpet like it was the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. I packed that night. A duffel bag. Clothes. A notebook. The pocket knife my mom gave me before she got sick. Dad didn't hug me. Didn't shake my hand. He just opened the door and let the cold November air rush in like punctuation at the end of a sentence. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said. That was it. I didn't cry until the bus crossed the state line. Life didn't get easier after that, just quieter. My aunt meant well, but she had her own problems. I worked odd jobs through high school, learned how to keep my head down, learned that no one was coming to save me. When other kids talked about college tours, I talked to managers about overtime. I went to a community college at night and worked construction during the day. Concrete in the summer, roofing in the fall. Hard work has a way of sanding the bullshit off a man. By my mid-20s, I had calluses, discipline, and a deep distrust of promises. I didn't speak to my father for years. Then one day, out of nowhere, I got a letter. Not a call. A letter. Kyle was graduating college. Business degree. Dad wanted me there. I almost threw it away. But something, pride, curiosity, maybe spite, made me go. Kyle walked across the stage like he owned it. Dad stood and clapped so hard his hands turned red. When Kyle hugged him, Dad actually smiled. A real one. I hadn't seen that smile in decades. At the reception afterward, Dad pulled me aside. "Kyle's going to start at the company," he said. "Learn the ropes." "Good for him," I said. Dad studied me for a moment. "You still doing whatever it is you do?" I smiled. "Something like that." He nodded, already losing interest. That was the moment I understood something important. I wasn't invisible because I failed. I was invisible because I left. And that made me dangerous. Over the next 10 years, I built something quiet. I started small, consulting work, process optimization for manufacturers who were bleeding money and didn't know why. I learned how factories really worked. Where waste hid. Where leverage lived. I didn't talk about it. I didn't post online. I didn't brag. I just reinvested. One company turned into two. Two into five. Silent partnerships. Minority stakes. Board seats no one paid attention to because I didn't raise my voice. Including my father. His company struggled more than he admitted. Cheap management decisions. Kyle's ideas, flashy, half-baked, borrowed from podcasts. Dad ate it up. Fresh thinking, he called it. What he didn't know was that one of the firms quietly buying distressed debt connected to his company was mine. At first, I bought 5%. Then 10. Then more. Always through holding companies. Always legal. Always patient. At Christmas dinners, the few I attended, Dad bragged about Kyle. Kyle's a manager now, he'd say, chest puffed out. Really turned things around. I nodded and passed the potatoes. Kyle talked big. Didn't know what EBITDA stood for without Googling it. Took credit for the work of men who'd been on that factory floor longer than had been alive. And my father? He never once asked what I was doing now. That was fine. Because while he was busy congratulating himself for raising a man, I was reading balance sheets, signing contracts, and slowly, methodically, becoming his largest silent partner. 45%. That's the number I stared at on my laptop late one night, sitting alone at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee. 45% ownership of the company that kicked me out for a bedroom. I didn't feel joy. I felt calm. There's a difference. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, thinking about the boy standing on a lawn with a duffel bag and nowhere to go. He didn't know it then, but that night had taught him everything he needed to know about power. And the funny thing about power? It doesn't need to announce itself. I didn't buy 45% of my father's company out of revenge. That's what people assume when they hear a number like that. Truth is, I bought it the same way I learned to survive as a teenager, quietly, carefully, and without asking permission. Revenge is loud. Ownership is silent. The next morning, I drove down to Soulard and sat in my usual booth at a diner called Nadine's, the kind of place with chipped mugs and bacon that tastes like somebody still cares. The waitress, Donna, topped off my coffee without asking. "You look like you slept in your clothes again," she said. "I didn't," I replied. "Just slept like a man with paperwork in his bloodstream." She snorted and walked off, and I pulled out my folder. Inside were the things my father never bothered to understand. Cap tables, debt schedules, loan covenants, and the ugly little truths sitting under all of it. The company wasn't thriving. It was coasting. My father's business was like an old truck that still runs because nobody's pushed it past 40 miles an hour in years. The minute you hit the highway, something shakes loose. And Kyle? Kyle had been flooring it. A week later I got the call from my attorney, Mara Ellison, out of Chicago. Mara was razor smart, wore her hair in a tight bun like she had no time for nonsense, and she'd saved me from my own impatience more than once. "You're officially at 45, she said. "Clean chain of title through the holdings. No gaps." "Good," I said. There was a pause. "That's all you've got?" "What do you want me to do?" Mara popped champagne. She laughed softly. "Most people would." "Am not most people." "No," she agreed. "You're not. Which brings us to the next part. Your father's still majority owner. But you know the company bylaws. You're close enough to block certain actions. You're also close enough to become a problem. I stared out the diner window at people walking by with grocery bags and no clue what their day was about to become. "I'm counting on it," I said. After I hung up, I took a slow sip of coffee and let my mind drift back to one memory I hated more than any other. It was my 17th birthday. I'd been living with my aunt for almost 2 years. Dad didn't call. Kyle didn't call. Not even a card. But that evening, the phone rang. It was my father. I remember standing there with the receiver pressed to my ear, heart thumping like maybe, he was finally going to say something that sounded like love. Instead, he said, "I need your social security number." That was it. I gave it to him because I was still young enough to think helping him might earn me a place back in the story. Turns out he needed it for paperwork tied to the company. Some old account my name was still attached to because when I was born, had put a tiny custodial stake in my name. A tax thing. A convenience. He didn't even say happy birthday. That's the kind of man Richard Hale was. And that's the kind of man who never noticed when the difficult son he threw away grew teeth. A month after I hit 45%, my father invited me to lunch. Not because he missed me. Because had finally smelled something in the air. We met at Tony's downtown, white tablecloths, servers in black vests, the kind of place my father liked because it made him feel like a king even when he was ordering chicken. Kyle was already there, leaning back in his chair like he owned the room. He wore a shiny watch, the kind young guys buy when they want people to think they've made it. His hair was slicked back. He had that smug half-smile I'd seen since he was 10. "Look who finally decided to show up," Kyle said. I took my seat calmly. I was in the neighborhood. Dad didn't waste time with small talk. He leaned in, voice low like he was negotiating a hostage situation. "There's been some movement," he said. "What kind of movement?" I asked, cutting my steak even though it hadn't arrived yet. "Habit. Keeps your hands busy. Keeps your face calm." "Ownership," he said. "Shares. People sniffing around." Kyle scoffed. "Some vulture fund, probably." I looked at Kyle, then back at Dad. "That's so?" Dad's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" I held his gaze without blinking. "I know a lot of things, Dad." Kyle laughed like it was a joke. "What, you gonna tell us you're some Wall Street shark now?" I smiled politely. "No. I'm not that flashy." My father stared hard, and for a second I saw something behind his eyes I'd never seen when I was a kid. Fear. Not big fear. Not panic. Just that subtle realization that the world might not be under your thumb the way you thought. "Richard," Kyle said, waving his hand. "Come on. He's just messing with you. He doesn't even work for the company." Dad didn't laugh. That's the thing Kyle never understood. My father didn't trust anyone. Not truly. Not even his golden boy. Kyle was useful to him, a mirror that made him feel proud. But trust? No. My steak arrived. Perfectly cooked, honestly. I took a bite, chewed slowly, then dabbed my mouth with my napkin. "You really made Kyle a manager," I said casually. Dad's chest puffed. "He earned it." Kyle grinned. "Damn right." I tilted my head. "What does he manage?" Kyle blinked. "Operations." "Like production scheduling?" I asked. "Material procurement? Labor allocation?" Kyle's smile faltered a hair. "All of it." I nodded slowly. "Interesting. Because last quarter your scrap rate jumped 3%. Your overtime costs are up. Your lead time slipped." Dad's fork froze. Kyle's eyes widened. What are you talking about? I sipped water. I'm talking about the company you claim to manage. Dad set his utensils down with a careful clink. How do you know that? I held his stare. Because I pay attention. Kyle forced a laugh, but it came out thin. Okay, and? You read the newspaper? Dad didn't look at Kyle. He looked at me. Say what you're really saying, Dad demanded. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch long enough to be uncomfortable. Letting the waiter walk by, let another table laugh, let the whole restaurant keep living while my father's world tightened around him. Then I said it, calm as a weather report. I own part of the company. Kyle's face twitched. Bullshit. Dad didn't speak. His jaw worked once. How much? He asked. I took another bite of steak. Chewed. Swallowed. Enough, I said. Kyle slapped the table. You can't just own part of it. It's Dad's company. Dad's voice was quiet. Dangerous. How much, son? There it was. He hadn't called me son in years. Not because he loved me. Because he needed something from me. I met his eyes. 45%, I said. Kyle went pale. Literally pale. Like the blood drained out of his face so fast he didn't have time to be angry yet. Dad didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stared at me like he was looking at a stranger who'd walked into his house and sat at his table. That's impossible, Kyle whispered. I shrugged. It's not. Kyle turned to Dad. Tell him it's not. Tell him he's lying. Dad didn't answer Kyle. He was still looking at me. And in that moment, I realized something I didn't expect. My father wasn't angry yet. He was impressed. Not proud. Not loving. Just impressed. The way a man respects a storm after it rips the roof off his barn. Why? He asked finally. I set my fork down gently. Because you taught me, I said. You taught me what happens when you leave your future in somebody else's hands. Kyle stood up halfway, hands clenched. You did this just to screw us? I looked at him. No, Kyle. I did it because you don't know how to work. And someday soon, the company will need someone who does. Kyle's eyes burned with panic and rage, and Dad's face stayed carved out of stone. But inside that stone, I saw gears turning. I wasn't the teenager on the lawn anymore. I wasn't the kid begging for a seat at the table. I was the man who'd quietly bought half the damn table. And now all three of us were sitting there, staring at the check that hadn't even come yet, knowing the real bill was still on the way. Power doesn't announce itself when it enters the room. It waits. It listens. And then it lets everyone else make mistakes. After lunch, my father didn't call me. Not that day. Not the next. Silence stretched like a held breath. Kyle, on the other hand, spiraled. I heard about it from places my father never considered dangerous, people he thought were furniture. A foreman I'd worked beside years ago texted me first. Your brother's barking orders like he's auditioning for a movie. Guys are pissed. Another message followed from a logistics supervisor I'd once helped quietly restructure inventory flow at another firm. Kyle just canceled a vendor contract that took us 5 years to stabilize. No backup plan. That's the thing about inexperienced authority. It panics when it senses weakness. Kyle felt the ground shifting under him, and instead of digging in, he flailed. I didn't intervene. Not yet. You don't stop a man from stepping on a rake when he insists on running through the yard. A week later, my father finally called. Come by the office, he said. After hours. No greeting. No small talk. Same voice he used when I was a kid and had already decided the punishment. The warehouse hadn't changed much. Same concrete floors, same smell of oil and hot metal. Same crooked clock above the break room that always ran 5 minutes fast. My mother used to joke that Richard liked time afraid of him. I walked into his office at 7:30 p.m. He was standing by the window, hands behind his back, staring down at the factory floor like a general inspecting tired troops. Kyle wasn't there. That told me everything. "You embarrass me," my father said without turning around. I closed the door gently behind me. "I told you the truth." He turned then. His face looked older than I remembered. Not weak, just worn thin at the edges. "You blindsided me," he said. In front of Kyle. I met his eyes. "You blindsided me when you threw me out at 15. The silence that followed was heavy, but different than before. This wasn't avoidance. This was something closer to recognition. "You never understood how this works," he said. "A company needs loyalty. Family." I let out a small breath. "No. A company needs competence. You taught me that. You just didn't mean to." He scoffed. "Kyle is learning." "No," I said calmly. "Kyle is pretending." My father's jaw tightened. "You think you're better than him?" "I think I'm prepared," I said. "That's different." He walked back to his desk and sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. For a moment, he looked tired enough to be human. "You didn't build this," he said quietly. "You didn't bleed for it." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the desk. "I bled plenty. Just not where you were looking." He didn't respond to that. Instead, he pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it toward me. Inside were financial projections Kyle had approved. Expansion plans. Aggressive timelines. Debt stacked on debt like dry timber. "This is what he wants," Dad said. "Growth. Visibility." I flipped through the pages slowly. "This will break the company," I said. Dad exhaled. "That's what I'm afraid of." There it was. Not love. Not apology. But fear. Fear opens doors pride keeps locked. "You made him manager," I said. "Now you're afraid to admit you were wrong." My father stared at his hands. "You don't understand what it's like to build something from nothing and hand it over." I nodded. "I do. That's exactly what you did to me." That landed. I could see it in his eyes. "I'm not here to take revenge," I continued. "I'm here to prevent collapse. Yours. The company's. Even Kyle's, whether he deserves it or not." He looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm not moving against you," I said. "Not yet. But I won't let him keep running operations." Dad bristled. "He's my son." "So am I." The words hung there between us like a held breath. Finally, Dad leaned back in his chair. "What do you want?" I didn't smile. I didn't raise my voice. "I want oversight," I said. "Operational veto. Independent audits. And I want Kyle moved out of day-to-day control." Dad shook his head. "He'll see it as betrayal." I shrugged. Then he'll finally understand how leadership feels. That night, I left the office without an agreement. But something had shifted. You can feel it when a structure cracks, not all at once, but enough that you know gravity is doing its job. Kyle called me 2 days later. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "What the hell did you do?" he snapped the moment I picked up. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, then brought it back. "Hello to you too." "You went behind my back," he said. "Dad's second-guessing everything now." "I didn't go behind your back," I replied. "I went around it." You think you're some kind of genius? He sneered. You think money makes you important? I paused before answering. Not for drama, because the truth deserved space. No, I said. Competence does. He laughed bitterly. You always had this chip on your shoulder. And you always had a cushion, I said. Look where that got us. You want to humiliate me, he said. That's what this is. I sighed. Kyle, if I wanted to humiliate you, I wouldn't have waited this long. That shut him up. You don't belong here, he said finally. You left. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. No. I was removed. He hung up on me. 3 weeks later, the board meeting happened. Kyle walked in like he owned the room. Suit too tight. Confidence borrowed, not earned. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, papers neatly stacked, pen aligned just so. Several board members glanced at me with curiosity. They knew the numbers now. They knew who I was. My father took his seat at the head. Kyle launched into his presentation like a man sprinting across thin ice. Big words. Big promises. No contingency. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then one of the older board members cleared his throat. Kyle, can you explain the cost overruns in Q3? Kyle stumbled. Another asked about labor attrition. Then supplier instability. Then safety violations. Each question peeled back another layer of bravado until what was left was raw and exposed. My father watched. Didn't interrupt. Didn't rescue him. When it was my turn, I didn't attack. I corrected. I offered alternatives. Data-backed, boring, effective. By the end of the meeting, no one raised their voice. They didn't need to. The vote wasn't dramatic. Just final. Kyle was removed from operations temporarily. He stormed out. My father stayed seated long after everyone else left. You didn't have to do it that way, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. I did. He nodded once. You've changed. I met his gaze. So have you. You're just noticing now. As I walked out of the building, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Relief. Because the hardest part wasn't taking power. It was waiting long enough to deserve it. And the hardest conversations were still ahead. The thing nobody tells you about power is that once you have it, people start telling you the truth, but only after they've exhausted every lie that used to work. Kyle disappeared for a while after the board meeting. No calls. No texts. No dramatic apology or angry voicemail. Just absence. That worried my father more than he let on. I saw it in the way he lingered by his phone. The way he asked questions he didn't finish. The way he stayed late at the office but got nothing done. Guilt ages a man faster than failure. 2 weeks after Kyle was removed from operations, the numbers started stabilizing. Overtime dropped. Scrap fell. Morale improved, not because I was some savior, but because chaos had finally stopped masquerading as leadership. I was walking the floor one afternoon when an older machinist named Frank Morales pulled me aside. Frank had been there since before I left home. He still remembered me as a skinny kid sweeping metal shavings after school. Didn't think I'd see you back here, he said. Didn't think I'd own half the place either, I replied. He chuckled, then grew serious. Your brother didn't listen. I know. He talked, Frank continued. A lot. But he didn't hear a damn thing. I nodded. That's expensive. Frank studied me. You gonna fire him? I didn't answer right away. Not yet. That night, my father invited me to dinner. His house looked the same furniture, same smell of lemon cleaner, and old habits. Kyle's old room was bigger than ever now. Mine had become a storage space. We ate quietly for a while. Steak. Potatoes. The same meal had served the night he kicked me out, like repetition could turn cruelty into tradition. "You're good at this," my father said finally. "At what?" "Running things," he said. "Seeing ahead." I chewed slowly. "I had to be." He nodded. Kyle never had to be. There it was again. Almost regret. Almost. "You know," he continued, "I thought toughness made men. I thought pressure revealed character." "And?" I asked. "And I confused pressure with protection," he admitted. I set my fork down. "You protected him from consequences." He sighed. "And I mistook your resistance for disloyalty." I looked around the dining room, the same walls that had heard my mother laugh once, the same walls that swallowed my teenage anger whole. "You didn't just throw me out," I said quietly. "You erased me." My father's shoulders sagged. "I know." That was the closest I'd ever get to an apology. Kyle showed up the next day. Unannounced. Uninvited. Furious. He burst into my office like a storm with nowhere to go, face red, eyes wild. "You turned him against me," he shouted. I didn't stand. Didn't raise my voice. Just waited. "You poisoned him," Kyle continued. "You made me look incompetent." "You did that yourself," I said calmly. He slammed his hands on my desk. "You don't belong here." I leaned forward slightly. "I belong everywhere you failed to earn." That broke something in him. "You think you're better because you struggled?" He sneered. "Because life was hard." "No," I said. "I'm better because I learned." He laughed bitterly. "You want the company, don't you?" I didn't dodge it. "Yes." His eyes widened. "You'd take it from Dad?" "I'd save it," I corrected. "From you?" "And from his pride." Kyle shook his head. "You always hated me." That surprised me. "I didn't hate you," I said honestly. "I hated what you represented." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Unquestioned love," I replied. "Unchallenged approval. A life without consequences." He stared at me, breathing hard. "You think firing me will fix everything?" "No," I said. "But keeping you here will break it." Silence filled the room. Thick. Heavy. Finally, he said, "He won't let you." I smiled faintly. "He already has." Kyle left without another word. The offer came a month later. My father wanted out. Not fully. Not publicly. But he was tired. Tired of fighting markets he no longer understood, tired of defending a son who refused to grow, tired of pretending strength meant control. He asked me to buy him out? The irony didn't escape either of us. "I'll do it," I said. "But on one condition." He looked at me. "Kyle?" "Yes." "What about him?" "He leaves," I said. "With a severance. Enough to land on his feet. But no titles. No favors. No golden parachute." My father closed his eyes. "That will destroy him," he said. I shook my head. "No. This is the first chance he'll have to build something real." He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "You're harder than I ever was." I met his gaze. "No. I'm fairer." The papers were signed on a rainy Thursday. No ceremony. No applause. Just ink and silence. I was officially the majority owner. Kyle was officially unemployed. He didn't come to say goodbye. My father cleared out his office slowly over the next few weeks. He stopped coming in every day. Started gardening. Took long walks. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what came next. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the factory floor, he stood beside me and said, "I should have seen you." I didn't answer. "You survived me," he continued. "That should have told me something." I looked at him then. Really looked. "I didn't survive you," I said. "I survived without you." He nodded, tears welling but unshed. "And still you came back?" "Yes," I said. "Because someone had to clean up the mess." He laughed softly. "You always were stubborn." "Persistent," I corrected. As he walked away, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness. Understanding. Kyle sent me one last message a week later. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "I hope you learn." That was it. The company moved forward. Quietly. Efficiently. Profitably. And me? I slept better than I had in decades. Because the boy on the lawn had finally been avenged, not with cruelty, but with competence. And the final lesson was still waiting. There's a quiet that comes after storms that most people mistake for peace. It isn't peace. It's adjustment. It's the sound of the world recalibrating now that the shouting has stopped. The first morning after the deal closed, I walked the factory floor alone. No entourage. No speeches. Just steel-toed boots on concrete, the steady rhythm of machines doing what they were designed to do when nobody's ego got in the way. Men nodded at me as I passed. Some smiled. Some didn't. Respect isn't universal, but consistency earns something close enough. I stopped at the old clock over the break room. Still 5 minutes fast. Some things don't need fixing. Kyle didn't show up to collect his things. He had someone else do it. A guy in a rented SUV who wouldn't meet my eyes. That hurt more than his shouting ever did. I didn't hate my brother. I hated what he never had to become. A few weeks later, my father asked me to meet him at the house. Same dining room. Same table. This time, no steak. Just coffee and silence. "I sold the boat," he said suddenly. I looked up. "You loved that boat." He shrugged. "Loved the idea of it. Never used it much." "That tracked?" "I wanted to tell you something," he said, fingers wrapped tightly around his mug. Before I get too old to pretend it doesn't matter." I waited. "When I kicked you out," he said, "I told myself I was doing the right thing. That you'd either sink or swim. And if you swam, you'd thank me someday." I said nothing. "I was wrong," he continued. "I wasn't teaching you strength. I was avoiding discomfort. Yours and mine." The clock ticked loud in the silence. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. "I don't even know if I deserve it." I finally spoke. "I didn't come back for closure." He nodded slowly. "I know. That's how I know you're not lying." After that, things settled into a new shape. Not perfect. Just honest. The company grew, not explosively, not recklessly. Steady contracts. Smart investments. People promoted because they knew the work, not because of their last name. Every now and then, someone would ask, "So you really fired your own brother?" I'd answer the same way every time. No. I stopped letting him pretend. Kyle tried a few ventures after that. A startup with friends. A consulting thing. Nothing stuck. Last I heard, he was working for someone else, mid-level, supervised, accountable. I hoped it stayed that way. One evening, months later, I found myself back at Nadine's diner. Same booth. Same waitress. Donna poured my coffee and tilted her head. You look lighter, she said. I am, I replied. Business good? Business is honest. She smiled. That's better. I sat there watching the window fog up, thinking about a 15-year-old kid standing on a lawn with a duffel bag, thinking his life was over. Funny how wrong he was. If I could talk to him now, I wouldn't tell him it gets easier. I'd tell him it gets truer. Because the truth is this. Being thrown away didn't break me. Being ignored didn't weaken me. Being underestimated didn't delay me. It sharpened me. And here's the thing nobody tells you when you're young and unwanted. Sometimes the people who push you out aren't enemies. They're just teachers who don't know they're teaching. The man who survives without applause is the one who owns the room when the noise finally stops.